Hello, everybody. I trust you are well. I'm going to talk about what is a beat sheet today and give you some advice about how to think about them. This is largely a video lecture based on the handout that is also attached to this. But maybe this video lecture will help a little bit. First, what exactly is a beat sheet? Essentially, a beat sheet is an outline for the proposed script. So you write a beat sheet before you write the script. And essentially, a beat sheet is an outline. They're the same thing exactly. Now, many students just want to start writing a screenplay from scratch. They don't understand, once they've got the story and run the three dimensions of character and all that work, why can't they just start writing the screenplay in screenplay form? Well, there are three primary reasons. One is, unless you are a very seasoned writer, a screenplay is too complicated in its demands for character, story, and structure to create it one scene at a time from scratch. One needs a plan or a map. A beat sheet is that plan or map. Secondly, professionally in both television and movies, the studio, the producer, and other collaborators will want to review and approve a beat sheet before a writer goes to script. In other words, writing a beat sheet is a standard part of a professional writer's occupation. You're never going to go to script without writing what's called story, which is presented in the form of a beat sheet. It's to the advantage of the writer, you, to have your producers and your studio's approval on your story beat sheet before you go to script. Now, that doesn't mean they can't change their minds, but it makes it more difficult for them. So theoretically, everybody should be in agreement on exactly what your story is, who your characters are, how it's going to be structured precisely before you go to screenplay. And so there's always an approval process where the collaborators on a movie get together and assess that, and it's done based on a beat sheet. Also, and most importantly, rewriting a beat sheet is much more efficient than rewriting a screenplay. You are going to be moving scenes around like crazy. You are going to be thinking of new ideas. You're going to suddenly say, oh, I need a different subplot, or I need to adjust this character in some way. It's relatively easy to do that in the format of a beat sheet. But once you're in screenplay format, it gets complicated and more difficult. Part of it is you've just written a lot more. There's a lot more sort of things you have to rewrite. But a good beat sheet, it's actually pretty efficient to rewrite and try out new ideas and see if things work. Okay, so a beat sheet really is about getting character, story, and structures nailed down. Once you go from a beat sheet to a screenplay, you can really focus on character, but particularly as it emerges in dialogue and behavior and action, without concerning yourself with structure or basic story. You've already figured that out. So you look at the beat sheet and say, okay, now I'm going to write this scene. Then when you're done with that scene, you write the next scene that's in the beat sheet. That doesn't mean there's not some back and forth there, but there's much less if you don't write a beat sheet, okay? Now, in a beat sheet, and this is a key idea, a lot of beginning writers make these mistakes in this area. In a beat sheet, each beat describes one scene. Usually in a completed beat sheet, each beat is no longer than the 3 or 4 sentences that it takes to describe what happens in that scene. For me, when I'm creating a beat sheet, the key elements are the location of the scene, who is in the scene, what they do, and what information the protagonist or the audience will take away from that scene. In other words, I don't necessarily have to write that last bit, what the information is, but it's going to be clear from reading the beat what it is. Now, having said that, in earlier drafts of a beat sheet, when I'm just kind of trying ideas out, I may not have this level of detail. I might not know the location of a scene. I might not know exactly when it takes place. I just sort of know broadly what might happen in it. So in earlier drafts, don't be afraid of not including all this detail. But as you get to a more mature beat sheet, you should have that information. Now, again, what is a scene? Remember, a beat, each beat in a beat sheet for a screenplay refers to a single scene. What is a scene? Again, this seems to be confusing. Most fundamentally, a scene is a point of time and a specific location where an event occurs. To put it another way, if there is a change of time or a change of location, that is a new scene. But if there is no change of time and there is no change of location, then it is not a new scene. I think it's easy to understand this for instance. If 10-year-old Tommy sits with his parents at dinner and they have a huge fight and mommy leaves the room, it all takes place in the dining room. Mom is left, we don't follow her, and that's a single scene. That's all it is. That's a single beat. It still remains a single scene if, after mommy leaves the room, daddy talks to Tony about what just happened and breaks down and cries. The scene is continuous as to time and location. It's still a single beat. Even though we see a fight and then we see the aftermath of the fight, it's all in a single location and it's all continuous. If, however, Tony leaves the table and enters his parents' bedroom to comfort his mother, then that's a new scene. There is a location change. Or, alternatively, Tony leaves the room, night passes, and Tony re-enters for breakfast to discover his father passed out drunk in the dining room, then that's also a new scene. There's been a distinct time passage, even though there's no location change. The most common mistake I see that beginning writers do is they write multiple beats for scenes that are in fact continuous as to time and location. Again, somebody will have a dinner party, it's one scene, it's continuous, and they will write 4 beats for that scene. But there aren't 4 beats, there's only one beat because it's all continuous in time and location, okay? Now, one area where this rule gets complicated is in writing action. A car chase is obviously discontinuous as to location. For now, though, just write action as a single beat or scene. Now, let's get into some prosaic elements here. In writing a beat sheet, another rule you must follow is to sequentially number your beats. In words and pages, this can easily be done by using bullets and numbering formats. It's much more efficient to let the word processing program number your beats because as you do rewrites, you will move beats around. You do not want to have to worry about manually renumbering your beats every time you try a new idea. Almost all word processing programs give you this ability if you look in the format area. As a broad rule of thumb, a movie screenplay will generally have between 55 to 100 scenes or beats. Let's think about that. If you think about it, 120 pages, remember a screenplay page is 1 minute. Most movies are 2 hours long, therefore, theoretically, a 120-page script should be the basis for that movie. As it happens, for most movies, the average scene length will be 2 pages or 2 minutes or shorter. In fact, it's not uncommon for movies to have, on an average, a 1.5 minute average scene length. But going with 2 minutes, that means a screenplay should have approximately 60 to 70 scenes in it, or an outline or a beat sheet for a screenplay should have 60 to 70 beats. Now, if you think about this, a 55 beat screenplay will be very talky. It'll be a family drama. A 100 beat screenplay is much more likely to be a thriller or an action piece. There will be many small scenes. Now, let me emphasize, this is a rule of thumb. There are some screenplays that have 140 to 180 scenes in them. Very few have less than 55, in fact. But a heavy-duty thriller or police procedural might have 140 scenes in it. Also, some movies are 3 hours long, and those are going to be 180-page screenplays. Please don't write any of those for this class. Now, again, another rule of thumb is the first act of a screenplay will have, on average, around 20 scenes. That doesn't mean it can't have 15 scenes. It doesn't mean that it can't have 25 scenes, but it'll have, on average, around 20 scenes. What you do know, if you write your first act and it's only got 10 scenes or 10 beats in it, that's not enough. You haven't spent enough time on it. The second act will have around 30 to 40 scenes or beats. The third act will have between 10 and 15. So these are some rules of thumb. Again, very broad. They can be violated. But in fact, again, if your first act has only 10 scenes, you have a problem. Similarly, if your third act has 30 scenes, you've also got a problem. Now, finally, another thing to consider is an act breakdown is defined by structural elements. So when you're thinking about how long a first act of your screenplay is going to be, how long the second act, etc., and the third act are going to be, these are defined by structural elements. The first act contains the inciting incident, which is usually no later than the fifth scene or beat or page 10, and ends with the first plot point. The second act contains the midpoint twist and ends with the second plot point. The second plot point will be the last scene in the second act. The third act contains the climax, the payoff, and resolution. Generally, in the third act, the climax must start no later than 3 or 4 beats from the beginning of the third act. So in essence, once the second plot point has taken place, which signals that the third act is beginning with the next scene, you've got to get to the climax quickly. Okay? So take that in mind. Again, there's this has all been summarized in a handout. Also in the handout is a short example of a few beats, and there's also another handout that I've posted, which also gives an example of a beat sheet for a full screenplay outline. Okay? Enjoy this. This is fun. You're about to write your first act. I'm excited to read it. I will talk to you soon.